We are back to this is the issue we spoke of once before, and that is possible, not required. Possible only is, the way I view it at least, amendment to the rules of procedure for board meetings. And what I've done is included for your reading enjoyment the last three resolutions of this board related to procedure, with an eye toward seeing how those have evolved. There was really a pretty narrow time frame between the second, the most recent and the next and most recent. They were both adopted in 2012, and I think, although I didn't compare them too closely, the real difference is that set forth the addition of Section 1, Code of Conduct, in the more recent and current board resolution, essentially the Choose Civility Code of Conduct. And so that had not been part of previous resolutions. So in anticipation of this discussion, county senior administrative staff discussed some of the issues set forth in my one-page cover letter, as well as discussing this matter at department head meetings. There are 10 items that were essentially identified for possible discussion. That's not an exhaustive list. It's intended to provoke conversation, discussion. I think the eye here is towards having a better public meeting and serving your constituents better. The number 10, integration of a video recording system, I can already report to you we're having discussions about that through the budget process. I think that was kind of the indication that we got when we were last here. And so I, for today's discussion, didn't really intend to go there necessarily. I think the consensus was that you were interested in that to the degree that it was affordable and we could otherwise provide for it. At least that's how staff took it. And so we'll be going down that road in the future. But items 1 through 9 remain, and we would like to at least provoke some conversation on those points here today. Because it's listed on the cover letter doesn't mean that I subscribe to it one way or the other. The only way that it got to this list is through discussion with multiple contacts. Multiple people expressed interest in these issues. These are not single-person issues. These are multiple people issues. Now, that being said, understand that some of the information sources were department heads or department staff or administrative staff. And I think everyone, to a person, understood that it's not their meeting. It's your meeting. And so, and they appreciate that. So, but they wanted to raise the issues, discuss them, and apparently I got Pat to do that. So, please don't shoot the messenger. Some of them are kind of provocative, like public comment. The three specific things set forth there, and I don't know how you would like to do this. If you would like to go through this 1 through 9, if you would just like to begin to have an open conversation, I'm not dedicated to any particular process. My hope is that today we have a discussion about these board rules, about any changes that could be made or areas that you might like to see modification to or not, and that I then retire from today's meeting with some direction, some indication as to what you want, and then try and draft that into what looks to be a working current resolution with the changes that you'd like, and come back in draft form and see if it's what you like. And almost akin to the marijuana cultivation ordinance, where we have a series of exchanges, and we tune it up as we go till we get to a point where we're satisfied, you're satisfied with what it looks like. That's my view on what I think could be a productive way to proceed. Of course, I'll take whatever direction you want.
I think it's okay at the board to start number one and then go on down.
Okay. So, did you have something?
Well, if you don't mind, I guess maybe we should just talk a little bit about the background of the meetings. And I think it's important to know, to put things in context in terms of what the purpose of a board meeting is. It is your meeting. It's the board's way of conducting business. It's your only way of conducting business, in fact. And it's your meeting to do that. It's not a forum, to have 34,000 members of the public come in and conduct business. It's the board's job and role to conduct business. And that's, I think, sometimes lost. I know I'll probably be featured in several websites for saying what I'm going to say, but I think it's the fact that it needs to be put out there that it's you all that are conducting business. And you'll have people claim that it's not your meeting, it's somebody else's meeting. When in fact, I think it's clear that it is, and you've been elected to represent those other people, those other 34,000 or 5,000 people, and to conduct their business. So I think it's important to keep that in context as we go through this process of developing policies for the way we conduct our meetings.
Richard and I share that view, and I have, although articulated in a different way, I think a similar view, and that is that I think sometimes it is contended that this is the people's meeting. I view it slightly differently, and that is that it's the people's business being conducted by the people's elected representatives in front of the people. And that's maybe a fine point, but maybe not. So I don't think we're so far apart on that, but again, it's your meeting.
Right, and on public comment, I'm satisfied with what it says in here.
There is one point that came up, and if I may, I'd like to kind of go at one of them at a time. There have been, there's one point on your regular agenda that speaks to additions and or deletions from the agenda. And I believe that we have in the past afforded the public the opportunity to comment upon the addition to the agenda or deletion from the agenda of particular items. And while that is something that you are free to do if it's your pleasure, the law does not require that. There's a specific case on point.
First of all, I just have to say that I agree in general with what you were suggesting, but I think the law also requires that the board, when it's conducting the public's business as the public's representatives in the setting of the board, that we have to entertain input and comment from the public. And I think if we go to page 9 of the existing resolution 12-39, towards the middle and latter part of the page, it defines.
Can I catch up to you, Mr. Supervisor?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what page was that?
Page 9,
Thank you very much.
12-39.
Yes, sir.
It defines who the public is, and I think there's some misperceptions that exist out there that will continue to exist out there, and websites propagate that misperception, and that's okay, because that's part of the public's right to do whatever they want. You have the right to be wrong, for that matter, under our constitutional law. The public is defined here is the term public includes everyone except members of the board, county department heads, elected officials, or their designees collectively referred to as staff, and any authorized signatory party to a contract agendized and pending before the board. Staff may address any items on the agenda if recognized by the chair. Contracting parties may address concerns to which they are parties if recognized by the chair. So in terms of defining that, we have, there is a provision in here that the public, can address the board for a period of 3 minutes. And so a lot of issue is made about staff presentations, and staff presentations can take much more than 3 minutes. Board members, in the debate we have with each other, can take more than 3 minutes. To Chapmanize, as Supervisor Whipple likes to claim, can take more than 3 minutes. Those particular dialogues are not defined as public under here and are not subject to the 3-minute rule. And I apologize to those who don't sit on the board that the fact that comments can take more than 3 minutes is irritating to them. The difference is that they have the right to speak for themselves for 3 minutes. The elected board members are representing several thousand individuals in their district, and I guess if you took all 2,500 constituents times 3 minutes, you could have 7,500, I guess, minutes per board member per item, I guess, if you're going to exercise. And that's, the nature of the process. So I think we have to define that, or at least have that understanding that, the debate that takes place, the public has a right to give their input, and there are limitations. And the chair, I think, historically has been pretty liberal at letting people go beyond that 3-minute rule because if it benefits the discussion and the debate and the consideration of the board, I think that's important for the public's business. When it becomes repetitive and confrontational and is designed to disrupt the discussions versus enhancing the discussions, then I think the chair is within the purview of the ordinance or the resolution governing our meetings, has the right to shut that down. And you get into talk about disruptive behavior and the like. But I think it's important to note that who the public is versus who staff is, who the boards are, who the elected department heads. And there is a differentiation in terms of how the rules of procedure apply. And that has been sort of kind of lost over time. And I think it's important that we regain that focus.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chapman, do you, as to that aspect of the current resolution, do you find it acceptable as current?
Oh, yeah, it has, and it's evolved. This is something that I think the original rules of procedure were adopted back in 1978. It was modified, I believe, sometime about 1990. The 1998 was really the first and real major overhaul of that because by then we had a CAO, because when we first had it, rules of procedure, there were no CAOs, so you had to kind of define how all that kind of worked, the clerk's office and how the agenda is formalized. And the 98 one stayed in place up until basically 2012, and that's when we saw a couple modifications of how to move around and to conduct business. But for the most part, that definition of public and how that's worked council has pretty much been the standard for 30, 35 years now.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, again, the narrow question, at least as it relates to this item, is permitting public comment on additions or deletions. Public in the sense that the resolution contemplates, and public in the sense that Mr. Chapman just underscored, commenting on additions or deletions from the agenda. That was an issue that was advanced by some, at least to the point that it made the list.
Well, and I think, if I could add, because I think it's relevant and important, up until 1998, I think people pretty much observed that. 1998 was an election year, and we had a candidate in the 3rd District who was running, who used, he did his campaign at the podium, and he basically that spring prior to the primary election basically hijacked the board's agenda, and it became, our discussion basically were tied to and was defined by that person's, you might say, demand, and using the rules of procedure that were in place at the time, placing items on the agenda, coming to the podium, said, I want this talked about, and basically set the agenda which consumed the time that we had and basically redirected the board's energy away from its ongoing business to dealing with the business of this one individual. And I don't have a problem saying who he is. He still lives here in the county, in Janesville, and his name was Bill Butler. He was very effective at using the rules and the podium to be able to direct the business. And so that's where the thing was amended to require that in order to get something on the agenda, there's avenues created to do that. So it wasn't something that was open-ended and directed from the podium. And there's been numerous attempts since to try to use that. I mean, it was something that people tuned into and saw as a great opportunity for a special interest to capture and control what we could do and how we could do it. And so that's what the purpose of these procedures are for. And I think public comment has sustained itself over the years in a fairly decent fashion.
And so to recap, Mr. Chapman, are you content with
Oh,
the
yeah.
aspect of the resolution as it currently exists on that issue?
Yes, it allows us to take care of business in an appropriate fashion.
Is there any comment from public comment about the public comment part? Mrs. Spencer?
That was good. Mr. Burns has shown in the past no knowledge and actually contempt for the Brown Act, but this meeting is a public, it declares it as a public entity, therefore you're under the Brown Act, and we can comment on any agenda item. It's very clear in the Brown Act that we can comment on any item. And so if Mr. Burns, because of his lack of knowledge of the Brown Act, is looking to restrict or violate the Brown Act further, he's going to be met head-on with the law. So public comment, you can give men 15 minutes, and you can give women that you don't like 3 minutes. That's I'm willing to deal with because we do keep track of that stuff. But the Brown Act governs this. It always will until they do away with it. So Can We Help is willing to pay for Mr. Burns to go to a Brown Act seminar, even if we have to hire an attorney for him to go that specializes in Brown Act, because he either has no knowledge or he has total contempt for the Brown Act. So that's an offer we make to the board. We will pay for him to go to.
Thank you for your offer. Any other comment? Aaron, you have a comment?
Yeah, on the public comment, when we have the time, it says in here that it's limited to 3 minutes. It can be at the discretion of the chairman. But when necessary, the clerk of the board shall operate the timing device. I don't think that's necessary. She's always busy down there. I think we need to change that to the chairman's designee because it's going to be down in front of her. Bob's sitting right behind her. He won't be able to see the light himself to do it. So,
Are you taking volunteers?
yeah, Jeff said he'd be willing. So we decided no. But I think they make it to the chairman's designation rather than specifically to the board.
Yeah, that's
And I'm sorry, where specifically you're
This is
referencing?
B3.
Thank you.
Page 8, number 2. At the very bottom, page 8.
Thank you. Okay, and so that would be the chair or the chair's designee?
Yes.
He's giving you an out.
But you need to also fix it on B3 because the same language.
Very good.
Page 9. Right.
Got it. Will do.
Okay, let's move on to the authority to remove from consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I have a suggestion for this item. Currently, the board policies allow for anyone, any member of the public, to pull an item from the consent calendar. That's obviously not a requirement of the Brown Act or the regulation that we're looking at. I would suggest
Which item are you on?
2.
Authority to remove.
I would, and of course, the public, by virtue of the various laws applying, has the opportunity to comment on the consent calendar, but I would suggest that items be pulled from the consent calendar by only board members or other other staff, rather than allowing the public to pull those. Of course, the public would have the opportunity to request a supervisor to pull something from the consent calendar. But that would, I think, alleviate some concerns that we have of members of the public that just want to frustrate the
So
process and pull
page 6 under item E is the consent agenda. It lists the people who can have deleted from the consent calendar. Board member, the CAO, a member of the public, or any department head. And
Right.
added- So you want to delete a member of the public from that?
Yes. That would be my recommendation.
Wow.
So a member of the public would have to get a hold of a board member to pull.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was kind of when it came to determining the agenda, where you have at one meeting, somebody at the podium creating a whole list of things to be the agenda at the next meeting. It became a requirement that to get on the agenda, it required a board member to sponsor that item.
Well,
So
what I would envision is that at the time the board takes up the consent calendar, there is an opportunity, of course, for any member of the public to comment, and a member of the public could come up to the podium and say, I'd like, for example, G1 or 2 removed for this reason at that time. Then it would be up to the board or any member of the board to say, yes, or if nobody acted, it would remain on the consent calendar. So it would, I think, just provide for, it would deny the opportunity for someone to just come up and say, I want to pull G1 through 20 or whatever it is to frustrate the process and make the meeting longer. But it would certainly give the discretion to the board, each board member, to pull whatever item they would like.
But before we adopt the consent calendar, anybody from the public has a right to comment on that action, which
Yes.
they do. So that's not precluded.
Right, not at all.
The item 3, Mr. Chairman, was the application of the code of conduct to the public as well as the board. There was some, I don't remember how this came to light, how this originally came up.
This was superintendent of schools.
Well,
Richard Barney's thing that.
Choose civility, yes.
But I believe that the choose civility code of conduct probably accidentally just applies to, or the way we've adopted it, just applies to the board members and perhaps staff, but not public. And I think the suggestion was that even though it's probably not very enforceable, to at least indicate that it applies to the
Indicate that,
as well.
correct. But really, this came up, I do recall, this one came up from several people who, frankly speaking, thought that some of the behavior of some individuals that attended the meeting, not staff or board, frankly was not consistent with the same standard that they were obliged to violate. Not that they wouldn't otherwise, but that it was at least their request that the public be invited to adhere to the code that's set forth in section 1 as well. And I think as CAO Egan correctly states, it's not enforceable unless there's a disruption, but it's a request, and that's about, I think, what could be said. It's a request.
I think this needs to be stated in there that,
It should pertain to everybody.
Pertain to everybody. I mean, it's common sense, but it's too bad that we live in a society where we have to reinforce common sense on paper sometimes.
And so I can do that in draft form.
let's, you table it, or not table, but just,
Just find a number of people.
let's move on to,
To be honest with you, the nuances, the language in this here, I was always under the impression that it applied to everybody. I didn't realize it was just the board member.
Probably an oversight when it was drafted.
let's go to, recognition committee presentation and proclamation, and then we'll come back to this.
Yeah.
Okay, need a motion to forward across. Harold, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are we on what, four?
I think so. Yeah. Item number 4 was just simply something that had come up on a couple of occasions on the last year, at least that I was around. We had, excuse me, we had some closed sessions that involved a number of items that were anticipated to go longer, and we had actually started to post an agenda that said 8:30 start time, and then we realized that we can't buy our own resolution. Our own resolution calls for 9 o'clock. And so, yet the ability to have a closed session between 9 and 9:30 and effectively deal with the great weight of the matters that were on it required careful deliberation and some time. You know, meanwhile, you've got a whole lobby full of people, and it just seemed like we ought to have a little more flexibility in our resolution to allow for, when necessary, and only when necessary, advancing start time of a meeting, perhaps advancing the time that it starts. So, not changing the 9:30 opening ceremonies.
Well, you could state in the resolution that the normal time for closed sessions to start, because the public has the right to speak before you go into closed session, is 9 o'clock. But when need arises and dictates, you know, that start time could be up as early as 8 a.m. if you wanted to.
That's basically what we do.
That's what we do, but the resolution doesn't reflect that.
Yeah. But we have steered away from that because, in the last year at least, because of some challenges on that point at least.
Yeah.
And so, and what we've gone to is to do a closed session from 9 to 9:30 or thereabouts, and sometimes it's
Well, I think-
and then to postpone the closed session to later in the
And I
day.
think when the historic resolutions as we evolved, that was the idea that for many years, the closed sessions came at the end of the meeting. We didn't have an early start for it, and then I think they decided to see it, and we needed to talk ahead of time, you know, because some of the items that were possibly beyond the closed session intended to be an action item later on.
Yes.
In terms of what would be announced or reported. And so that was why they started having closed sessions before as a precursor. And the idea being is that after you ran out of the 30 minutes, that you would continue the closed session to the end of the agenda. But
And so I think you're hearing from staff that it is requested not necessarily to change, you know, the proposition that closed session occurs from 9 to 9:30, but from time to time, when it does occur, that it's anticipated that a greater closed session time frame would be required, that we could actually have the flexibility in the resolution to advance the start time to 8:30 or 8 or
well,
something.
until about 1989 or 90, that time frame in there, the board sessions normally would start till 10 a.m. So they moved the board session up to 9:30 at that time. So you could do it either way. You could, you know, keep your 9 o'clock closed session and maybe not have your regular session start till 9 a.m.
You know, that's what he'll want.
Well, I don't know, especially in the wintertime.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't think the regular time of the meeting should be changed. If you're gonna have a long closed session, start it earlier or finish it at the end of the year.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that the 9:30 time change at all. What could,
I think what we're doing is, though, we should keep doing it, is word it right in the resolution.
okay.
Some of this could go down to line number 9, too. Which would be not scheduled to report.
That's a challenge that I don't know a solution to necessarily. And I'm looking for, I don't want to jump to another discussion point necessarily.
Right, but I'm saying these two could meld together if you're talking about changing times. You know, I mean, that's,
The suggestion I have for the departments is that perhaps we, because there's not a real clear solution, perhaps we delay department reports until after a certain time, maybe that's 10:30 or so, and that way at least then staff and department heads don't have to be here until that time and deal with all their issues after that.
Spencer, you had a comment?
Well, I'm a little confused here because you've had meetings at 8:30 before, you've had meetings at 8 o'clock before. You've had, according to the Sunday agenda on your website, you started at 6 a.m. So, you know, that was an error, and it was fixed on Monday morning. But you have always had the I printed it, Susan. I'm sorry, I printed it. It's on the website. Check it out. You know, you just made a mistake, so you don't have to lie about it. But you did. But anyway, you have the ability now, or you have been. I didn't know you were breaking rules, but you have had meetings at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 8:30 in the morning for closed session. If it is your intent to think that the people you don't want to hear from that come to the meetings, if you think that that's going to deter us, it's not. So make it at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be here. Jean will be here. Iona will be here.
Okay.
So you have the ability now, and you've exercised it, to continue your closed sessions in the afternoon. I think Mr. Burns' whole intent here is to keep Can-We Help and people that are your critics and want things to be done right.
I don't believe that.
Well, it looks like it.
Well,
I mean, from the discussion so far, that's what you're doing, and it's not going to work.
I don't operate on perception, I operate on facts, and I do not believe that it's any intent to start early and try to keep people from coming. Anyhow, thank you for your comments, we're going to move on.
Yeah, if it's okay, we'll just clarify in the draft language that the flexibility exists.
That's all.
Just clarify that in the language, okay. Shift.
Well, what it does is it takes away the argument of those who want to argue, so I think that's good.
I don't want to argue, let's go to number 5, shift in time to certain matters.
There, Ed, did you want
Well, there are certain items in the resolution
Order of business.
that are if you look at, I think it's page 2.
Right.
Where it says public hearings no earlier than 10 a.m., matters set for time certain normally begin no earlier than 10 a.m. We would just like the flexibility to be able to move those around a little more
Yeah, I did see the need for that.
to provide
Always been that.
to provide more structure.
Okay, so you want flexibility there. That'll be fine.
Number 6 was publication of the future board items list. That's that attachment page.
Well,
I don't know if that's...
that was never a part of it, and it became kind of like a tickler file because I think there was stuff that was being brought up at meetings, and then it was just sort of kind of never heard of again. And so the clerk's office, in order to started doing a tickler file, but it was for the clerk's office, and then that got passed out so people could see that, you know, that there was somebody looking ahead as to the agenda items, and before too long, it was attached to the agenda. I don't think that was ever the intent.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jaden, wasn't that a comment that you had? I can remember back a year or so when we started that, it seemed like you had some comments about bringing up things that never going anywhere.
I think it was Supervisor Chapman that brought that up a few times, that things seem to drop by the wayside.
But I don't think that the tickle file should be like the agenda. I think
Be
that
part of
was
the agenda.
being part of the agenda. I think it's good to have a file that
Yes.
you're trying to keep track of the things that people raise so that they don't just fall into oblivion, because they do, and they have,
They
and they
do,
will.
that same culture to correct.
But I think at the same time, it doesn't have to be a part of the agenda. And I think the clerk's office took it upon themselves to kind of help keep track of that, and I think that was a good thing. But how it got on the agenda wasn't something that was part of the resolution.
Where else would you put it?
Well, the clerk maintain it, you know, I mean, businesses do that to keep track of when they have to do things.
The question is, do we want to maintain that as part of the published agenda or not?
No, well, I don't think that was the intent.
Well, it's listed in the current resolution on page.
And that can be eliminated
Page
from
3.
the board resolution.
Well, the
If
list
that's
of dates of upcoming board meetings, having your meetings get.
I'm sorry, number 20.
Number 20 on page.
Okay, yeah, that's something that somebody added in there probably thinking they were doing good, but that wasn't the intent.
That's
never
easy,
been the intent.
that's easy to deal with.
Yeah. But it clutters up the agenda and makes it kind of hard.
Are we good with that?
Yes,
7,
that was an interesting conversation.
section
number
defining
7.
board relationships with elected county officers. I didn't know there was,
I'm sorry, say again, sir?
I didn't know there was a issue.
Generally, there isn't.
Doesn't the civility thing govern that?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And, you know, that's an excellent observation. I didn't really have a suggestion as I came into this conversation on that point, but I think it's perhaps just enough to say that on the list of those covered under Section 1, that reference is made to members of the Board of Supervisors, the public, and other county elected officers, period. And that's that.
Good enough.
No, but I think there's one more thing that needs to be added to that. And I think that might be where we've got a whole bunch of newly elected county officers. And so it's kind of, it's a new group. So that could probably be possibly the genesis. But and we also have new board members. And one of the things that I think that needs to be emphasized, and this is for the new board members coming from an old board member, is the board, the powers of the board only exist when the board's in session, which is 3, maybe 4 times a month. And then when the board's out of session, the power of the board evolves into the hands of the CAO. That's defined by state laws or by ordinance, by county ordinance. So individual board members do not possess the power of the board. So the ability to go into individual departments and offices and elected departments and sort of kind of, order things and push things around because they're members of the board is not, and that might be what's part of driven by that, is that the perception that board members are intruding. We don't have individual powers to do that. Now, what only keeps the board, the 27 days of the month that power is vested with the CAO, is the 3 days when we are here in terms of evaluating how the 27 days. So it doesn't say that board members don't have influence in the sense of, why are you doing this? Because that's not what the intent of the board in terms of the discussion. But board members don't have extraordinary power when it comes to interacting with the county bureaucracy outside of the board sessions. And I think that sometimes trying to define that gray line becomes challenging for both board members and for staff. I mean, we get a constituent calls up, and they're mad because they went into such and such office and they got treated miserably. So the natural inclination, being a parent or something, is you're going to go in there and beat up those people for being mean to your constituent. Okay, well, that's not really how you conduct business. And I think that's maybe what is being addressed there. Or if you...
That's an excellent point. I don't think, though, necessarily that was the genesis of the reason for asking it be put on this list. I think the reason that it was asked to be put on this list is I think there were perhaps a few events in the past where essentially a countywide elected official felt like they had essentially been ordered or called to the carpet before the board in public session. And with that, and I'm not saying whether that was the case or not. I'm just saying that the perception of a county elected official, countywide elected official, whether constitutional officers or otherwise, felt like they essentially got called to the carpet before a body that at least they perceive really has authority over their budget, and that's where it ends. Now, those aren't my words necessarily, but I think that was the perception, and the question was, well, where does that start and where does that stop?
Well, when the board's in session and there's an elected or appointed or any other county department person who the board is unhappy with, I think if the board decides to let them know how unhappy they are, we may not have the power to control their day-to-day conduct, but we do have oversight responsibility and influence when it comes from the budgetary or whatever staffing. I mean, there's a lot of avenues, and I've watched the board over the years conduct themselves. I mean, when I first joined the board, the county assessor was not in very good stead with one of the board members. And it was amazing to watch how that interaction took place.
Okay.
comment on that?
Yes, you should. You can.
I think what that meant is, with a lot of us being new, is that if something is on the agenda and it's coming from our department, and you guys have questions about it, it would be nice to hear those questions before the board meeting. Because sometimes, especially being new, a lot of us aren't really comfortable yet getting up and talking to you. It would be nice to know what you're going to ask for, what your concern is. Not that we're going to solicit a vote from you, but I know, like with Aaron on the banking, I would have brought my binders that day had I had known that he was going to have questions. But to Jim's other thing, I had one of Tom's constituents who caught him in the market about tax sale, and I believe Tom did the right thing. He said, call Nancy at the tax collector's office and talk to her about it and see if she can't handle it for you. I appreciate that. I appreciate when we do all interact as a team, because I think that we are a team. And I think that we just really would like to hear from you about things on the agenda, not necessarily going to Richard or going to Bob. Maybe you can come and talk to us ahead of time, and then we know what you're unhappy with, or what you have questions with, or what you're going to want us to come to board that day and talk to you about what's on the agenda. I just think that some kind of lack of communication, and we are all brand new, and we just need to work through this. And that's what I think that was for, is just to kind of give us a heads up and talk to us and let us know where you're coming from, so we can come here prepared to discuss it with you.
And I think that's reasonable on, major questions, but a lot of times during the discussion, some things come up in your mind that, you can't notify you about.
But I think it's still a fine line, because I've seen over the years board members who are overly aggressive and overly active in intruding into individual departments to try to, push them one way or the other. And I think that has to be, what you're saying is all well and good, but it's a two-edged sword. It could also cut the other way not so well. And I think we have to, and maybe that's what this issue is about, is how do you define that kind of a communication and working relationship. And it has to be kind of developed. It's not something that you just ordain. It has to be developed.
Well, the protocol needs to be developed,
Well, when board members go to new supervisors training, that's where they, with CSAC and the state level, they try to encourage you how to conduct yourself when you're interacting with the various departments.
I think I'm going to be a little politically incorrect with you for just a second, if I might. That some of the elected officials, not including Nancy, she's been very good about standing up and stating her interest. Have expressed privately. Let's not forget we're countywide elected officials. We're not just a district. We've got a whole constituency of our own, and I think really that was just the observation by the board sometimes that exists for them was part of the reason that it was requested to be advanced. That's all.
Okay. Enough on that.
Good discussion.
It was.
Okay. How board members agendized things.
Sure, and I think I precipitated this as a discussion, and mainly just to have the discussion about how we place things on the agenda and how the board members place things on the agenda, and I view that as my role as being the conduit between the board and getting things on the agenda. And I'd like to put some systems in place that get things on the agenda efficiently, timely, and quickly, but don't cause a lot of grief with Susan.
And staff disruptions.
Yeah, or grief with the clerk's staff when I call them and say, we need this item on the agenda next week. And I think we all understand there's emergencies that come up that we have to deal with. But in terms of routine agenda items, I guess my request would be that we just put something in place that allows for a timely transmission of the information to the clerk's office, so that I'm not calling Susan on Wednesday morning.
In the resolution, it defines the time frames that you turn stuff in and how the staff paperwork gets turned in. And I think the one thing the board doesn't think about is, if you've got something you want on the agenda, and even if you bring it up at a meeting like today, I want next week's agenda or the following week's agenda, that there's a clock running in terms of accumulation of materials that has to kind of basically come to a head in the clerk's office on Wednesday, Thursday, and the week before the agenda itself. And I know when it comes to these proclamations and things of those nature that I wind up getting involved in helping produce is I've got to work hard to make sure that Susan has it in a timely fashion. And that's true of anything. If we've got something that we're working on and we want the board to discuss it, and it's going to be in the agenda. It's not that you bring the stuff on Tuesday morning and distribute it. It has to be in the hands of the clerk's office no later than noon on Thursday, preferably by Wednesday. And according to our resolution, the departments have to have it turned in by the previous Friday.
And I guess I would suggest my preference for getting things on the agenda, and I know there's going to be multiple ways that we have to do that, but my preference, and I don't think Susan disagrees with me, is for them to come, if the time allows, to come out in board members' reports. Richard, we'd like to have X, Y, and Z on the agenda, and not have it at the very next meeting, but the following meeting. Because when we say put it on the next meeting, that means we're all scrambling to get the agenda.
Well, the paperwork for the meeting after next is due this coming Friday.
Right.
Is what
Right.
we have to be mindful of.
So to the extent that that's possible, that I think is our general preference.
So basically, we have a policy, but just not following it.
I didn't say.
I think the departments and the staff are following because they're under lockdown, but I don't think the board members understand that we have an obligation.
I don't know if it's that we don't understand. I think we just don't consider it. I mean, yeah, I'll call Richard and say put this on the agenda. I'll call Susan and say put this on the agenda.
To a degree, they accommodate you.
They always accommodate me. But I mean, they're nice people.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Could you say
Not
that louder?
you.
Jane, could you turn the video on?
Excluding Mr. Burton. Okay, I think Richard up that procedure if there's not one already.
Well, the best thing is you got Regina there, and if when it does, you go and see Regina. She's good at capturing what you're doing and getting it plugged in a proper fashion.
And she's the one scrambling.
True. You could use another.
And you don't want to make her meetings unhappy.
No. Okay, how to schedule things so employees are not there all day.
We pretty much should, Aaron, I think pretty much should.
Yeah, and I try, if I have an agenda and I see some people coming to that item, it's like a recognition committee, I try to get through that. And sometimes board members will send you a note, hey, so-and-so is here for a specific item. Yeah, we try to do that the best we can, but it's not always immediately.
Those were the items that, I'm sorry.
These seem, a lot of what we're talking about seems like really minor modifications or changes to the.
Well, I think on that issue, I think, like we talked about when we incorporate video in that, I think the department heads, it's being streamed up audio, and my knowledge was like, staff needs to be here. If you're listening to it, it's hard to get engaged in how the pace is going. Just through audio, it's like listening to a baseball game.
It's hard to know when to show up.
Hard to know when to show up, but if you do video, I think that'll solve a lot of that problem.
I think it'll definitely help.
Part of it is geographic location, coming across town, basically to go to a meeting and trying to get it right, not being late, but, yeah.
Aaron, that's what.
Yeah, I have one other question. On page 10 of the 12-039.
Page 10, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Under section 10, procedure for hearing. On number 2, it says any supervisor may voluntarily or involuntarily disqualify. What's that involuntarily?
That's when you're challenged by somebody for.
I think Aaron's question is who has the authority to preclude a board member? Don't know.
That's a great question.
I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think the board as a body has the authority public has the authority to.
No. I have a question on here.
Yes.
Under that too, that's a good question, but
Yes.
there's a part in there in the middle that I think needs to be looked at as it relates to the requirements of the Brown Act that have kind of been modified in recent years. It says, except that a disqualified board member may address the board as a member of the public regarding the issue during the time that the general public speaks on the issue. And I think that almost has to be removed from that paragraph, because when you're disqualified under those provisions of state law, you're supposed to like leave the room. You cannot influence the discussion and deliberation of the remaining board members. And that's something that is more of a recent refinement. I mean, it's evolved over the years, but probably the last 5+ years, that's been pretty much the standard. So how can you be required to leave the room, but yet at some point come back in and address the board, even though you're supposed to be out of the room? So board members usually don't come back in and address the rest of the board under that. Now, this might have been permissible 15 or 20 years ago, but I think in more recent years, that's not even permissible anymore. So that should probably be totally stricken out.
I'd like to take a look at that, because I think there's a genuine issue there. I respect you, Mr. Chapman. I'm still under the impression that it's permissible. I want to look, though I'm not certain one way or
But
the
you
other.
might want to look
Yes.
closely, because I think that just in the last couple of years, there's been a number of cases that have come down that basically, and I mean, this is going to the trainings that we've been
Yes,
to.
sir.
They make it real clear, because that question, I think, wasn't the last time, but maybe the time before, was asked by somebody, wasn't from the board here, but it was one of the other boards saying, if I'm disqualified, and yet I want to come in and testify, you know, and that specific question, and I think that attorney that was doing the training, I think we were all down to Bet's Hall or somewhere at that time. He made it real clear, no, the law says that you leave and you stay out of the room until they call you back in.
There's Brown Act issues, and there's conflict of interest issues, or political reform act issues. There's
Oh.
two different statutory schemes going on there.
And they cross again, cut across each
They
other. And what I'm saying is that particular language in here may not be something that's operable, because my impression is where we are now, you can't stick around and
But still, if you were the guy, say if I was building a house or something, and had the planning, as the applicant, I could stand up and say my spiel on it fairly.
I don't think I don't.
You have to
You-
step
you
in.
want to-
I
time,
don't think
we
you
got-
have to
Sit in the
step
audience
down.
and talk.
At times, we've had board members go to the
Some of
podium.
the Wassy do that.
Yeah, Wassy did that.
Jack Hansen did that on a few occasions. But the point being is, under the older rules, that might have been permissible, but I think the current standard now is, your wife can come and speak on your family's behalf, but the idea is that you,
I wouldn't be worried about it.
yeah, I think you might find
It's
yourself.
a good point to explore. I don't have an answer for you, John.
Well, ask the FPPC or whoever, they'll tell you.
Okay, any other questions on this? I think that's the last
Thank you
agenda
for
item.
that discussion.
Okay.
We'll bring back a draft
Yeah.
resolution to